Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and today I am here to talk about 5 reasons your sewing looks homemade. And I want to make a distinction really quickly on the difference between homemade and handmade. Also, we'll talk about why I'm in a different setting here at the end of the video if you are wondering, so I will explain at the end of the video. Okay, homemade versus handmade. In my mind, and this is just kind of maybe my own distinction, but when something looks homemade, I think something that people can definitely tell did not come from a store, and something that maybe looks like it was made in a home ec class, that kind of sort of thing. Versus handmade would be something that looks couture, or something that not only looks like it came from a store, but maybe really high end. Like that's kind of the distinction. So in my mind, we want things to look handmade, or even kind of ready to wear, although that's a little bit of a double-edged sword as well. But we're not really looking for homemade. So today we're going to be talking about 5 reasons that your sewing does look homemade and basically how we can rectify that. So these 5 reasons are not in any specific order, but I will say I think the first and the last one are probably the biggest reasons, and so maybe the most important. But let's delve in and get started. So reason number 1 that your sewing looks I'm going to say it wrong, homemade, is that you are not pressing your seams as you go and not doing enough pressing. So I would say next to the sewing machine, the next important thing in a sewing hobby toolkit would be a great steam iron, and then obviously the ironing board that needs to go with that. Why? Because we can fix bad sewing with good pressing. But even if you have the best sewing, it can be made to look really bad with bad pressing, without pressing. So the importance here is to make sure that those seams look really crisp. So whether that is pressing our seams on the inside to one side, pressing them open, giving our hems good presses, pressing the lapels on jackets, cuffs, collars, that sort of thing. It just really makes a huge difference. When we skip that step, those seams just don't lie as flat, and they just don't look as good. They don't look as crisp. They don't look as professional. So I would probably say this is the number 1 reason why your things that you're sewing look homemade and not handmade. All right, number 1 in this or number 2, this kind of goes along the same track. But number 2 is that you are not finishing the seams on the inside of your garment. Now, you absolutely do not need to own a serger in order to have some really beautiful sewing, both inside and outside on your garments. Serger is great. I use my serger all the time. If you are wanting to delve more into the sewing hobby, I think that is a good investment to make later on down the road, but it is absolutely not necessary. There are many different seam finishes that we can do on the inside of a garment to give a really beautiful, even couture look on the inside, which the number 1 I would say being French seams, which is where we sew, I won't go too far, but sew our seams together, wrong sides together, we trim them, then we put it right sides, press them, do that pressing, turn the garment right sides together and sew again so that raw edge is encased fully on the inside of the garment. That is a beautiful finish. I use that on silk most of the time. It's just a really beautiful on the inside. But not only do finishing our seams help with the durability of the garment, but it also, you're not having things fray, you're not having the fabric fray. You can also do a little more ready to wear-ish finishes on the inside by using a zigzag stitch to finish off those seams, pinking shears, which are the zigzag scissors, or even a lot of sewing machines now have a faux overlock, which is like a faux serger stitch that basically wraps the edge of that raw edge on that seam so that you don't have that fraying, and it does help with the longevity of the garment. Those, I think, make a huge difference in making sure that your garments look a little bit more professional and less that you threw it together really quickly, as well as, like I said, helping with the longevity there. Okay, tip number 3. for why your sewing looks handmade or homemade is that you are using the incorrect interfacing on the inside of your garments. As you get into garment sewing, interfacing is something that comes up, whether you're interfacing a facing on a top or interfacing a collar or a cuff or a lapel, or whatever the case may be, a waistband, a fly, whatever the case may be. If you are using the incorrect interfacing, it can make the finished garment not look professional. For instance, we always, when we are garment sewing, want to use an apparel specific interfacing. We do not want to use craft interfacing on the insides of our garments unless there is something specific that you're going for. If you really want kind of that paper look, then, for whatever reason, then obviously that would be okay. The difference is craft interfacing is often, it looks kind of like paper. There isn't really a grain that you can see, and it just makes the pieces very, very stiff, even if you're using a lighter weight version. Apparel specific interfacing is going to act a little bit more like fabric. So it is going to drape and bend and hold the lines very similar to the outside fabric, adding the structure that is the reason you're using the interfacing without going too far one way and then having a really weird structured area where it shouldn't be that structured. My favorite interfacing to use is the Palmer Pletch line. I always keep their Perfect Fuse Sheer and their Perfect Fuse Medium in my stash. Those are kind of the two that I use the most. I also really like Fashion Sewing Supply here in the US, but they are closed at the moment. I believe one of the partners in that unfortunately passed away, so I don't know what's happening. They have fantastic interfacing. I don't know what's happening there right now, but yeah. There's other options, of course, worldwide as well. But finding a really good apparel appropriate interfacing makes a huge difference with our finished product. Okay, tip number 4 for how to not make or why our sewing looks homemade is that our top stitching. A lot of garments can use top stitching as a finish. For instance, a button-up shirt uses a lot of top stitching. If you are sewing a bias facing on the edge of a neckline, even working with hems, if you are not careful and making that top stitching very even all the way around, it can pretty easily look like you made it. And I feel like the goal with most of us when we're sewing our garments is we want people to be like, oh my gosh, you made that? Not, yeah, obviously you made that. And top stitching, even top stitching can be a real key in that. I have recently, and this is not a new thing, but there are magnetic seam guides that they sell. I don't normally use one. I've been sewing long enough and done enough projects that I can really eyeball, especially when I'm doing my top stitching. But if this is something you struggle with, and you can also use this for seam, if you really struggle with keeping your seams straight, a magnetic seam guide. I will use the one, I just purchased one because I am filming a intro to garment sewing class, and I wanted to show it for students that are just learning how to garment sew because it can be very helpful, but it magnetizes to the throat plate of your machine. You can move it to whatever depth you want, and it just really helps making sure that that top stitching is nice and even all the way around, whether it's a hem, a facing around the collar, whatever the case may be. But I will leave a link down below to the one that I purchased. It was very inexpensive. And it even came with a little measuring guide to make sure that you were putting it in the right spot. All of our machines do come with measurements on our throat plate, or most of them do. But if it's something that you just want a little bit more, because this comes up a little bit, some depth, so it's really easy to ride your fabric along that edge. Just really ensures that you are getting the exact depth that you want when making that line of stitching. I know people use tape and all sorts of things to mark on their machines to make sure that they're keeping their sewing straight. I just think because it's a little deeper, it really helps to make sure that that stays consistent. So a nice little sheet to make sure that your sewing is staying even to create that really even top stitching. Okay, tip number 5, or reason number 5 that your sewing is looking homemade, is that you are choosing the wrong fabric for your projects. Now, this one is, like I said, this is probably the next biggest one to pressing your seams really, really well. This one, however, I feel like takes a lot of trial and error. All of our patterns have on the back recommended fabrics, and absolutely you should follow those recommendations. That's what the designer had in mind when they drafted the pattern that you are using. But knowing different types of fabric, and a lot of times, for instance, a blouse pattern might be appropriate for both a cotton lawn and for a rayon challis. Well, those are two lighter weight fabrics, but they behave very differently. So knowing when to use a cotton lawn that's more structured versus when to use a rayon or a viscose challis, which has much more drape. This can be a very important distinction, just giving you the finished look that you're wanting. Are you wanting a crisp button-up shirt, for instance, or are you wanting a looser blouse feeling? Well, that's going to determine whether or not you're going for the cotton lawn or the rayon challis. I do have a whole series on my channel on learning fabric, and I talk all about different fibers and weaves and all sorts of stuff. I will leave a link to that playlist down below if you're interested in taking a look over there. But again, it can be a lot of trial and error. Order samples. If you do a lot of your online or a lot of your fabric shopping online, order some of those samples. Maybe even create a little book for yourself so you can, on some of the more common types, so you can easily test and see, is this what I'm envisioning for the final product? Making a blouse out of a quilting cotton is going to give you a very boxy fit, and that might not be the look that you're wanting. Maybe you decide, well, a cotton lawn it's thinner, so it has a little bit, still the structure, but a little bit more drape is what I wanted, not necessarily the quilting cotton that added some bulk. So it can be really important not only to follow those recommendations, but to also know the finished look that you're going for to make sure that you are pairing correct fabric with the pattern. Again, this is one of those things that's trial and error and just really delving into the sewing world, going into some fabric stores, reading the labels, feeling the fabric, or ordering samples online so you can kind of create your own book as well. All right, guys, that is it. 5 reasons your sewing looks homemade. Hopefully these were helpful in your own sewing practice. Now, where am I? Why am I filming in a very large and dark room? I am currently at my parents' house. I had to make a little impromptu trip back home, and everyone is okay, but it was a last minute impromptu trip that I had to make. So you're gonna see me here in my parents' basement for the next few videos, and filming on a phone. I don't have my lights here. I've got a ring light that I'm using. So please bear with me while maybe the quality of video is a little less than it normally is. I think this video and then the next 2 are probably going to be filmed here. So bear with me. We will be back to normal backgrounds and normal areas here in a little bit. But yeah, that is the story with me right now. It is a very busy season of life. But it's fine, and sewing brings us all through it, although I don't have access to my machines and stuff right now. Anyway, that is all I have for today. I hope you guys have a wonderful Tuesday. If you are near your machines, I hope you're able to get some time in your sewing room this week. If for nothing else, do a little sewing for me. And I will see you guys again next time. Have a good one.